This episode of Sleepy is proudly sponsored by Shopify. When I first started this show and started podcasting in general, I learned a lot of stuff the hard way. Writing, editing, recording, producing, marketing, social media. It was a lot to start doing this, and while I love knowing how to do all those things now, I definitely would have loved to know about tools that would have made my life simpler, like I do today. Tools that make my business and my life just run smoother. Well, Shopify is definitely one of those tools. It is the business behind the business. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Mattel to businesses just getting started. There's hundreds of ready-to-use templates to build a beautiful online store that matches your brand. Shopify has tons of helpful AI tools to help you build out and fill your site in no time. It's also really easy to get the word out with easily made email and social media campaigns. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. So if you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into reality with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Otis. Go to shopify.com/OTIS. Shopify.com/Otis. I'll put a link for this in the show notes. Thanks.
So good, so good, so good.
New fall arrivals are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Get ready to save big with up to 60% off Vince, Kurt Geiger London, and more.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
Because there's always something new.
Join the Nordy Club at Nordstrom Rack to unlock exclusive discounts on your favorite brands. Shop new arrivals first and more. Plus, get an extra 5% off every Rack purchase with a Nordstrom credit card. Great brands, great prices. That's why you Rack.
Hey, my name's Otis Gray, and you're listening to Sleepy. A podcast where I read old books to help you get to sleep. Got a brand new story for you tonight from one of my personal favorite authors and one of the first authors we ever read on the Sleepy Podcast. But before we get to the bedtime reading, I would just like to take a moment to thank all of our new patrons on patreon.com, which is a place you can go and pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of Sleepy. So, this week's incredible new patrons: Leanne, Kim C., Samantha, Sarah Grossman, Maria C., Mira Ratolashow, D., Penelope Riley, and Cresta Poole. Thank you all so much for being a part of making this show. It really means a lot. So thank you. And for anyone who doesn't know, the names that I just read, they just became supporters of the Sleepy Podcast on patreon.com. which is just a website that allows you to directly support people who make the stuff that you like for amounts like $1 a month, $2 a month. At $5 a month, you get access to our poetry feed, which has a ton of episodes you've never even heard before. But like I said, $2, it gets you access to the ad-free version of Sleepy, and $1 means so much to me. Any amount. And no matter how much you donate, even $1, I'll read your name in the opening credits of the next show after you do. So, if you would like to be a part of making the show too, like the names that I just read, you can go to patreon.com/sleepyradio. Thank you. And as always, the music you're hearing is by my good friend James Letkowski, and the cover art for Sleepy is by Gracie Kanan. Tonight I have a story by Kenneth Grahame. If that doesn't immediately ring a bell, Kenneth Grahame is the author of The Wind in the Willows, which is one of my personal favorite books, one of my personal favorite stories, absolutely one of my favorite animated movies. I just love The Wind in the Willows so much, and Kenneth Grahame is such an incredible writer. And this story, it's a novel called Dream Days. This is, it's a lot different than The Wind in the Willows in that it's definitely more geared for adults, even though it is kind of about some kids running around, living a dreamlike kind of existence, lost in imagination. And even though it is a little bit less narrative and story driven, which is really great for this podcast, as you know, it still has that signature Kenneth Grahame language, which is what made The Wind in the Willows so dreamlike and gorgeous and whimsical and fantastical. That same kind of eloquence and language is in this novel, and I think you're really, really going to like it. It was a pleasure to read. Sometimes you read old books like this, and every sentence you just think, wow, that was a beautiful sentence. That's this novel again and again, one sentence after another. So, thank you, Kenneth Grahame, for all the amazing literature. So, without further ado, tonight, this story, Dream Days, by Kenneth Grahame. And now's the time for you to fluff up your pillow just how you like it. Feel yourself melt into your bed. Get real comfortable. Close your eyes and let me read to you. Chapter 1. The 21st of October. In the matter of general culture and attainments, we youngsters stood on pretty level ground. True, it was always happening that one of us would be singled out at any moment, freakishly, and without regard to his own preferences, to wrestle with the inflections of some idiotic language long rightly dead. While another, from some fancied artistic tendency, which always failed to justify itself, might be told off without warning to hammer out scales and exercises, and to bedew the senseless keys with tears of weariness or of revolt. But in subjects common to either sex, and held to be necessary even for him whose ambition soared no higher than to crack a whip in a circus ring, in geography, for instance, arithmetic, or the weary doings of kings and queens, each would have scorned to excel. And indeed, whatever our individual gifts, a general dogged determination to shirk and to evade kept us all at much the same dead level, a level of ignorance tempered by insubordination. Fortunately, there existed a wide range of subjects, of healthier tone than those already enumerated, in which we were free to choose for ourselves, and which we would have scorned to consider education. And in these, we freely followed each his own particular line, often attaining an amount of special knowledge which struck our ignorant elders as simply uncanny. For Edward, the uniforms, accoutrements, colors, and mottos of the regiments composing the British Army had a special glamour. In the matter of facings, he was simply faultless. Among chevrons, badges, medals, and stars, he moved familiarly. He even knew the names of most of the colonels in command, and he would squander sunny hours prone on the lawn, heedless of challenge from bird or beast, poring over a tattered army list. My own accomplishment was of another character, took, as it seemed to me, a wider in a more untrammeled range. Dragoons might have swaggered in Lincoln green. Riflemen might have donned sporrans over tartan trews without exciting notice or comment from me. But did you seek precise information as to the fauna of the American continent, then you had come to the right shop. Where and why the bison wallowed, how beaver were to be trapped and wild turkey stalked, the grizzly and how to handle him, and the pretty pressing ways of the constrictor. In fine, the haunts and the habits of all that burrowed, strutted, roared, or wriggled between the Atlantic and the Pacific, all this knowledge I took from my province. By the others, my equipment was fully recognized. Supposing a book with a bear hunt in it made its way into the house, and the atmosphere was electric with excitement. Still, it was necessary that I should first decide whether the slot had been properly described and properly followed up, ere the work could be stamped with full approval. A writer might have won fame throughout the civilized globe for his trappers and his realistic backwoods, and all went for nothing. If his pemmican were not properly compounded, I damned his achievement, and it was heard no more of. Harold was hardly old enough to possess a special subject of his own. He had his instincts indeed, and at bird's nesting, they always amounted to prophecy. Where we others only suspected eggs, surmised possible eggs, hinted doubtfully at eggs in the neighborhood, Harold went straight for the right bush, bough, or hole, as if he carried a divining rod. But this faculty belonged to the class of mere gifts, and was not to be ranked with Edward's lore regarding facings, and mine as to the habits of prairie dogs, both gained by painful study and extensive travel in those realms of gold, the army list and Ballantyne. Selina's subject, quite unaccountably, happened to be naval history. There is no laying down the rules as to subjects. You just possess them, or rather, they possess you, and their genesis or protoplasm is rarely to be tracked down. Selina had never so much as seen the sea, but for that matter, neither had I ever set foot on the American continent, and byways of which I knew so intimately. And just as I, if set down without warning in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, would have been perfectly at home, so Selina, if a genie had dropped her suddenly on Portsmouth Hard, could have given points to the most of its frequenters. From the days of Blake down to the death of Nelson, she never condescended further. Selina had taken spiritual part in every notable engagement of the British Navy, and even the dark days when she had to pick up skirts and flee, chased by an ungallant De Ruyter or Van Tromp, she was yet cheerful in the consciousness that ere long she would be gleefully hammering the fleets of the world in the glorious times to follow. When that golden period arrived, Selina was busy indeed, and while loving best to stand where the splinters were flying the thickest, she was also a careful and critical student of seamanship and of maneuver. She knew the order in which the great line of battleships moved into action, the vessels they respectively engaged, the moment when each let go its anchor, and which of them had a spring on its cable. While not understanding the phrase, she carefully noted the fact. And she habitually went into an engagement on the quarter-deck of the gallant ship that reserved its fire for the longest. At the time of Selina's weird seizure, I was unfortunately away from home, on a loathsome visit to an aunt, and my account is therefore feebly compounded from hearsay. It was an absence I never ceased to regret, scoring it up with a sense of injury against the aunt. There was a splendid uselessness about the whole performance that specially appealed to my artistic sense. That it should have been Selina, too, who should break out this way. Selina, who had just become a regular subscriber to the Young Ladies' Journal, and who allowed herself to be taken out to strange teas with an air of resignation palpably assumed. This was a special joy, and served to remind me that much of this dreaded convention that was creeping over us might be, after all, only veneer. Edward also was absent, getting licked into shape at school, but to him the loss was nothing. With his stern, practical bent, he wouldn't have seen any sense in it, to recall one of his favorite expressions. To Harold, however, for whom the gods had always cherished special tenderness, it was granted, not only to witness, but also, priest-like, to feed the sacred fire itself. And if at the time he paid the penalty exacted by the sordid, unimaginative ones who temporarily ruled the roast, he must ever after, one feels sure, have carried inside him some of the white gladness of the acolyte who, greatly privileged, has been permitted to swing a censer at the sacring of the very Mass. October was mellowing fast, and with it the year itself, full of tender hints, and woodland and hedgerow, of a course well nigh completed. From all sides, at still afternoon you caught the quick breathing and sob of the runner nearing the goal. Preoccupied and possessed, Selina had strayed down the garden and out into the pasture beyond, where, on a bit of rising ground that dominated the garden on one side, and the downs of the old coach road on the other, she had cast herself down to chew the cud of fancy. There she was, presently joined by Harold, breathless and very full of his latest grievance. I asked him not to, he burst out. I said, if he'd only please wait a bit, and Edward would be back soon. And it couldn't matter to him, and the pig wouldn't mind, and Edward would be pleased, and everybody be happy. But he just said he was very sorry, but bacon didn't wait for nobody. So I told him he was a regular beast, and then I came away. And I believe they're doing it now. Yes, he's a beast, agreed Selina, absently. She'd forgotten all about the pig killing. Harold kicked away a freshly thrown-up molehill and prodded down the hole with a stick. From the direction of Farmer Larkin's demesne came a long, drawn note of sorrow, a thin cry and appeal, telling that the stout soul of Black Berkshire Pig was already faring down the stony track to Hades. Do you know what day it is? Said Selina presently, in a low voice, looking far away before her. Harold did not appear to know, nor yet to care. He had laid open his mole run for a yard or so, and was still grubbing at it absorbedly. It's Trafalgar Day, went on Selina tranceedly. Trafalgar Day, and nobody cares. Something in her tone told Harold that he was not behaving quite becomingly. He didn't exactly know in what manner. Still, he abandoned his mole hunt for a more courteous attitude of attention. Over there, resumed Selina. She was gazing out in the direction of the old high road. Over there the coaches used to go by. Uncle Thomas was telling me about it the other day. And the people used to watch for him coming, to tell the time by, or perhaps to get their parcels. And one morning, they wouldn't be expecting anything different. One morning, first there would be a cloud of dust as usual, and then the coach would come racing by, and then they would know. For the coach would be dressed in laurel, all laurel from stem to stern, and the coachman would be wearing laurel, and the guard would be wearing laurel, and then they would know. Then they would know. Harold listened in respectful silence. He would much rather have been hunting the mole, who must have been a mile away by this time, if he had his wits about him. But he had all the natural instincts of a gentleman, of whom it is one of the principal marks, if not complete definition, never to show signs of being bored. Selina rose to her feet and paced the turf restlessly with a short quarter-deck walk. "Why can't we do something?" she burst out presently. He did everything. Why can't we do anything for him?" "Who did everything?" inquired Harold meekly. It was useless wasting further longings on that mole. Like the dead, he traveled fast. "Why, Nelson, of course," said Selina shortly, still looking restlessly around for help or suggestion. "But he's dead, isn't he?" asked Harold, slightly puzzled. "What's that got to do with it?" retorted his sister, resuming her caged lion promenade. Harold was somewhat taken aback. In the case of the pig, for instance, whose last outcry had now passed into stillness, he had considered the chapter as finally closed. Whatever innocent mirth the holidays might hold in store for Edward, that particular pig, at least, would not be a contributor. And now, he was given to understand that the situation had not materially changed. He would have to revise his ideas, it seemed. Sitting up on end, he looked toward the garden for assistance in the task. Thence, even as he gazed, a tiny column of smoke rose straight up into the air. The gardener had been sweeping that afternoon, and now an unconscious priest was offering his sacrifice of autumn leaves to the calm-eyed goddess of changing hues and chill forebodings, who was moving slowly about the land that golden afternoon. Harold was up and off in a moment, forgetting Nelson, forgetting the pig, the mole, the Larkin betrayal, and Selina's strange fever of conscience. Here was fire, real fire to play with, and that was even better than messing with water, or remodeling the plastic surface of the earth. Of all the toys the world provides for right-minded persons, the original elements rank easily the first. But Selina sat on where she was, her chin on her fists, and her fancies whirled and drifted, here and there, in curls and eddies, along with the smoke she was watching. As the quick-footed dusk of the short October day stepped lightly over the garden, little red tongues of fire might be seen to leap and vanish in the smoke. Harold, anon staggering under armfuls of leaves, anon stoking vigorously, was discernible only at fitful intervals. It was another sort of smoke that the inner eye of Selina was looking upon, a smoke that hung in sullen banks round the masts and hulls of the fighting ships, a smoke from beneath which came thunder and the crash of the splinter rip, the shout of the boarding party, the choking sob of the gunner stretched by his gun. A smoke from out of which at last she saw, as though a riven pall, the radiant spirit of the victor, crowned with the coronal of a perfect death, leap in full assurance up into ether that immortals breathe. The dusk was glooming towards darkness when she rose and moved slowly towards the beckoning fire, something of the priestess in her stride, something of the devotee in the set purpose of her eye. The leaves were well alight by this time, and Harold had just added an old furze bush which flamed and cracked stirringly. "Go and get some more sticks," ordered Selina, "and shavings, and chunks of wood, and anything you can find. Look here. In the kitchen garden, there's a pile of old pea sticks. Fetch as many as you can carry, and then go back and bring some more." "But I say," began Harold amazedly, scarce knowing his sister, and with a vision of a frenzied gardener, pea stickless and threatening retribution. "Go and fetch 'em quick," shouted Selina, stamping with impatience. Harold ran off at once, true to the stern system of discipline in which he had been nurtured. But his eyes were like round O's, and as he ran he talked fast to himself, in evident disorder of mind. The pea sticks made a rare blaze, and the fire, no longer smoldering suddenly, leapt up and began to assume the appearance of a genuine bonfire. Harold, awed into silence at first, began to jump round it with shouts of triumph. Selina looked on grimly, with knitted brow. She was not yet fully satisfied. "Can't you get any more sticks?" she said presently. "Go and hunt about. Get some old hampers and matting and things out of the tool house. Smash up that old cucumber frame Edward shoved you into the day we were playing Scouts and Mohicans. Stop a bit. Hooray. I know. You come along with me." Hard by there was a hothouse, Aunt Eliza's special pride and joy, and even grimly approved of by the gardener. At one end, in an outhouse adjoining, the necessary firing was stored, and to this sacred fuel, of which we were strictly forbidden to touch a stick, Selina went straight. Harold followed obediently, prepared for any crime after that of the pea sticks, but pinching himself to see if he were really awake. "You bring some coals," said Selina briefly, without any palaver or pro and con discussion. "Here's a basket. I'll manage the sticks." In a very few minutes, there was little doubt about its being a genuine bonfire and no paltry makeshift. Selina, a maenad now, hatless and tossing disordered locks, all the dross of the young lady purged out of her, stalked around the pyre of her own purloining, or prodded it with a pea stick. And as she prodded, she murmured at intervals, "I knew there was something we could do. It isn't much, but still, it's something." The gardener had gone home to his tea. Aunt Eliza had driven out for hers a long way off and was not expected back till quite late. And this far end of the garden was not overlooked by any windows, so the tribute blazed on merrily unchecked. Villagers far away, catching sight of the flare, muttered something about "them young devils at their tricks again," and trudged on beerwards. Never thought of what day it was, never thought of Nelson, who reserved their honest pint pots to be paid for in honest pence, and saved them from liters and decimal coinage. Nearer at hand, frightened rabbits popped up and vanished with a flick of white tails. Scared birds fluttered among the branches or sped across the glade to quieter sleeping quarters. But never a bird nor a beast gave a thought to the hero to whom they owed it that each year their little homes of horsehair, wool, or moss were safe established neath the flap of the British flag. And that game laws, quietly permanent, made the chassis a terror only to their betters. No one seemed to know, nor to care, nor to sympathize. In all the ecstasy of her burnt offering and sacrifice, Selina stood alone. And yet, not quite alone. For as the fire was roaring at its best, certain stars stepped delicately forth on the surface of the immensity above, and peered down doubtfully, with wonder at first, then with interest, then with recognition, with a start of glad surprise. They at least knew all about it. They understood. Among them, the name was a daily familiar word. His story was a part of music to which they swung. Himself was their fellow, and their mate and comrade. So they peeped, winked, and peeped again, and called to their lagged brothers to come quick and see. The best of life is but intoxication, said Selina, who during her brief inebriation had lived in an ecstasy as golden as our drab existence affords, had to experience the inevitable bitterness of awakening sobriety, when the dying down of the flames into sullen embers coincided with the frenzied entrance of Aunt Eliza on the scene. It was not so much that she was at once and forever distracted, broke, sent before the mast, and branded as one on whom no reliance could be placed. Even with Edward safe at school, and myself under the distant vigilance of an aunt, that her pocket money was stopped indefinitely, and her new church service, the pride of her last birthday, removed from her own custody and placed under the control of a trust. She sorrowed rather because she had dragged poor Harold, against his better judgment, into a most horrible scrape, and moreover because, when the reaction had fairly set in, when the exultation had fizzled away, and the young lady portion of her had crept timorously back to its wonted lodging, she could only see herself as a plain fool, unjustified, undeniable, without a shadow of an excuse or explanation. As for Harold, youth and a short memory made his care less pitiful than it seemed to his more sensitive sister. True, he started upstairs to his lonely cot bellowing dismally, before him a dreary future of pains and penalties, sufficient to the last crack of doom. Outside his door, however, he tumbled over Augustus the cat and made capture of him, and at once his mourning was changed into a song of triumph, as he conveyed his prize into port. For Augustus, who detested above all things going to bed with little boys, was ever more knave than fool, and the trapper, who was wily enough to ensnare him, had achieved something notable. Augustus, when he realized that his fate was sealed, and his night's lodging settled, wisely made the best of things, and listened with a languorous air of complete comprehension to the incoherent babble concerning pigs and heroes, moles and bonfires, which served Harold for a self-sung lullaby. Yet, it may be doubted whether Augustus was one of those rare fellows who thoroughly understood. But Selina knew no more of this source of consolation than of the sympathy with which the stars were winking above her. And it was only after some sad interval of time, and on a very moist pillow, that she drifted into that quaint, inconsequent country, where you might meet your own pet hero, strolling down the road, and commit what harebrained oddities you like, and everybody understands and appreciates. Chapter 2. Dies Irae. Those memorable days that move in procession, their heads just out of the mist of years long dead. The most of them are full-eyed as the dandelion that from dawn to shade has steeped itself in sunlight. Here and there in their ranks, however, moves a forlorn one who is blind in the sense of the dulled window pane, on which the pelting raindrops have mingled and run down, obscuring sunshine and the circling birds, happy fields and storied garden, blind with the spatter of a misery uncomprehended, unanalyzed, only felt as something corporeal in its buffeting effects. Martha began it, and yet Martha was not really to blame. Indeed, that was half the trouble of it. No solid person stood in full view, to be blamed and to make atonement. There was only a wretched, impalpable condition to deal with. Breakfast was just over. The sun was summoning us, imperious as a herald with clamor of trumpet. I ran upstairs to her with a broken bootlace in my hand, and there she was, crying in a corner, her head in her apron. Nothing could be got from her but the same dismal succession of sobs that would not have done, that struck and hurt like a physical beating. And meanwhile, the sun was getting impatient, and I wanted my bootlace. Inquiry below stairs revealed the cause. Martha's brother was dead. It seemed her sailor brother Billy, drowned in one of those strange, far-off seas it was our dream to navigate one day. We had known Billy well and appreciated him. When an approaching visit of Billy to his sister had been announced, we had counted the days to it. When his cheery voice was at last heard in the kitchen, and we had descended with shouts, first of all, he had to exhibit his tattooed arms, always a subject for fresh delight and envy and awe. Then he was called upon for tricks, jugglings, and strange, fearful gymnastics. And lastly came yarns, and more yarns, and yarns till bedtime. There had never been anyone like Billy in his own particular sphere, and now he was drowned, they said, and Martha was miserable. And I couldn't get a new bootlace. They told me that Billy would never come back anymore, and I stared right out the window at the sun, which came back right enough every day, and their news conveyed nothing whatever to me. Martha's sorrow hit home a little, but only because the actual sight and sound of it gave me a dull, bad sort of pain low down inside, a pain not to be actually located. Moreover, I was still wanting my bootlace. This was a poor sort of a beginning to a day that, so far as outside conditions went, had promised so well. I rigged up a sort of jury mast of a bootlace with a bit of an old string and wandered off to look up the girls, conscious of a jar and a discordance in the scheme of things. The moment I entered the schoolroom, something in the air seemed to tell me that here, too, matters were strained and awry. Selina was staring listlessly out of the window, one foot curled round her leg. When I spoke to her, she jerked a shoulder testily, but did not condescend to the civility of a reply. Charlotte, absolutely unoccupied, sprawled in a chair, and there were signs of sniffles about her, even at that early hour. It was but a trifling matter that had caused all this electricity in the atmosphere, and the girl's manner of taking it seemed to me most unreasonable. Within the last few days, the time had come round for the dispatch of a hamper to Edward at school. Only one hamper a term was permitted him, so its preparation was a sort of blend of revelry and religious ceremony. After the main corpus of the thing had been carefully selected and safely bestowed, the pots of jam, the cake, the sausages, and the apples that filled up corners so nicely, after the last package had been wedged in, the girls had deposited their own private and personal offerings on the top. I forgot their precise nature. Anyhow, they were nothing of any particular
practical use to a boy. But they had involved some contrivance and labor, some skimping of pocket money, and much delightful cloud building as to the effect on their enraptured recipient. Well, yesterday, there had come a terse acknowledgment from Edward, heartily commending the cakes and the jam, stamping the sausages with the seal of Smith Major's approval, and finally hinting that, fortified as he now was, nothing more was necessary but a remittance of 5 shillings and postage stamps to enable him to face the world armed against every buffet of fate. That was all. Never a word or a hint of the personal tributes or of his appreciation of them. To us, to Harold and me, that is, the letter seemed natural and sensible enough. After all, provender was the main thing, and 5 shillings stood for a complete equipment against the most unexpected turns of luck. The presents were very well in their way, very nice, and so on, but life was a serious matter, and the contest called for cakes and half-crowns to carry it on, not gewgaws or knitted mittens and the like. The girls, however, in their obstinate way, persisted in taking their own view of the slight. Hence it was that I received my second rebuff of the morning. Somewhat disheartened, I made my way downstairs and out into the sunlight, where I found Harold playing conspirators by himself on the gravel. He had dug a small hole in the walk and had laid an imaginary train of powder there too. And as he sought refuge in the laurels from the inevitable explosion, I heard him murmur, "My God," said the Tsar, "my plans are frustrated." It seemed an excellent occasion for being a black puma. Harold liked black pumas, on the whole, as well as any animal we were familiar with. So I launched myself on him, and with the appropriate howl, rolling him over on the gravel. Life may be said to be composed of things that come off and things that don't come off. This thing, unfortunately, was one of the things that didn't come off. From beneath me, I heard a shrill cry of, "Oh, it's my sore knee," and Harold wriggled himself free from the puma's clutches, bellowing dismally. Now, I honestly didn't know he had a sore knee. And what's more, he knew I didn't know he had a sore knee. According to boy ethics, therefore, his attitude was wrong, sore knee or not, and no apology was due from me. I made halfway advances, however, suggesting we should lie in ambush by the edge of the pond and cut off the ducks as they waddled down in simple, unsuspecting single file. Then hunt them as bisons flying scattered over the vast prairie. A fascinating pursuit, this, and strictly illicit. But Harold would none of my overtures and retreated to the house wailing with full lungs. Things were getting simply infernal. I struck out blindly for the open country, and even as I made for the gate, a shrill voice from a window bade me keep off the flower beds. When the gate had swung to behind me, with a vicious click, I felt better, and after 10 minutes along the road, it began to grow on me that some radical change was needed, that I was in a blind alley, and that this intolerable state of things must somehow cease. All that I could do, I had already done. As well-meaning a fellow as ever stepped was pounding along the road that day, with an exceeding sore heart, one who only wished to live and let live, in touch with his fellows, and appreciating what joys life had to offer. What was wanted now was a complete change of environment. Somewhere in the world, I felt sure, justice and sympathy still resided. There were places called pampas, for instance, that sounded well. League upon league of grass, with just an occasional wild horse, and not a relation within the horizon. To a bruised spirit, this seemed a sane and a healing sort of existence. There were other pleasant corners, again, where you dived for pearls and stabbed sharks in the stomach with your big knife. No relations would be likely to come interfering with you when thus blissfully occupied. And yet I did not wish, just yet, to have done with relations entirely. They should be made to feel their position first, to see themselves as they really were, and to wish, when it was too late, that they had behaved more properly. Of all professions, the army seemed to lend itself the most thoroughly to the scheme. You enlisted, you followed the drum, you marched, fought, and ported arms under strange skies through unrecorded years. At last, at long last, your opportunity would come, when the horrors of war were flickering through the quiet countryside where you were cradled and bred, but where the memory of you had long been dim. Folk would run together, clamorous, palsied with fear, and among the terror-stricken groups would figure certain aunts. What hope is left us, they would ask themselves, save in the clemency of the general, the mysterious, invincible general, of whom men tell such romantic tales? And the army would march in, and the guns would rattle and leap along the village street, and last of all, you, the general, the fabled hero, you would enter on your coal-black charger, your pale-set face seamed by an interesting saber cut. And then, what every boy has rehearsed this familiar piece a score of times, you are magnanimous. In fine, that goes without saying. You have a coal-black horse and a saber cut, and you can afford to be very magnanimous. But all the same, you give them a good talking to. The pleasant conceit simply ravished my soul for some 20 minutes, and then the old sense of injury began to well up afresh and to call for new plasters and soothing syrups. This time I took refuge in happy thoughts of the sea. The sea was my real sphere, after all. On the sea, in especial, you could combine distinction with lawlessness, whereas the army seemed to be always weighted by a certain plodding submission to discipline. To be sure, by all accounts, the life was at first a rough one. But just then, I wanted to suffer keenly. I wanted to be a poor devil of a cabin boy, kicked, beaten, and sworn at for a time. Perhaps some hint, some inkling of my sufferings might reach their ears. In due course, the sloop or felucca would turn up. It always did. The rakish-looking craft, black of hull, low in the water, and bristling with guns. The Jolly Roger flapping overhead, and myself for sole commander. By and by, as usually happened, an Eastman would come sailing along full of relations. Not a necessary relation would be missing. And the crew should walk the plank, and the captain should dance from his own yardarm, and then I would take the passengers in hand, that miserable group of well-known figures cowering on the quarter-deck. And then the same old performance, the air thick with magnanimity. In all the repertory of heroes, none is more truly magnanimous than your pirate chief. When at last I brought myself from the future to the actual present, I found that these delectable visions had helped me over a longer stretch of road than I had imagined. And I looked around and took my bearings. To the right of me was a long, low building of gray stone, new, and yet not smugly so, new and yet possessing distinction, marked with a character that did not depend on lichen or on crumbling semi-effacement of molding and mullion. Strangers might have been puzzled to classify it. To me, an explorer from earliest years, the place was familiar enough. Most folk called it the settlement. Others, with quite sufficient consciousness for our neighborhood, spoke of them their fellows up by Halliday's. Others again, with a hint of derision, named them the monks. This last title, I suppose to be intended for satire, and knew to be fatuously wrong. I was thoroughly acquainted with monks and books, and well knew the cut of their long frocks, their shaven poles, and their fascinating big dogs, with brandy bottles round their necks, incessantly hauling happy travelers out of the snow. The only dog at the settlement was an Irish terrier, and the good fellows who owned him, and were owned by him, in common, wore clothes of the most nondescript order, and mostly cultivated side whiskers. I had wandered up there one day, searching, as usual, for something I never found, and had been taken in by them and treated as friend and comrade. They had made me free of their ideal little rooms, full of books and pictures, and clean of the antimacassar taint. They had shown me rather their chapel, high hushed and faintly scented, beautiful with a strange new beauty, born both of what it had and what it had not, that too familiar dowdiness of common places of worship. They had also fed me in their dining hall, where a long table stood on trestles plain to view, and all the woodwork was natural, unpainted, healthily scrubbed, and redolent of the forest it came from. I brought away from that visit, and kept by me for many days, a sense of cleanness, of the freshness that pricks the senses, the freshness of cool spring water, and the large swept spaces of rooms. The red tiles and the oaken settles suggested a comfort that had no connection with padded upholstery. On this particular morning, I was in much too unsociable a mind for paying friendly calls. Still, something in the aspect of the place harmonized with my humor, and I walked my way round to the back, where the ground, after affording level enough for a kitchen garden, broke steeply away. Both the word Gothic and the thing itself were still unknown for me, yet doubtless the architecture of the place, consistent throughout, accounted for its sense of comradeship in my hour of disheartenment. As I mused there, with the low, gray, purposeful-looking building before me, and thought of my pleasant friends within, and what good times they always seemed to be having, and how they larked with the Irish terrier, whose footing was one of a perfect equality, I thought of a certain look in their faces, as if they had a common purpose and a business, and were acting under orders thoroughly recognized and understood. I remembered, too, something that Martha had told me about these same fellows doing a power of good, and the other hints I had collected vaguely of renouncements, rules, self-denials, and the like. Thereupon, out of the depths of my morbid soul, swam up a new and fascinating idea, and at once the career of arms seemed overacted and stale, and piracy, as a profession, flat and unprofitable. This, then, or something like it, should be my vocation and my revenge. A severe line of business, perhaps, such as I had read of, something that included black bread and a hair shirt. There would be vows, too, irrevocable, blood-curdling vows, and an iron grating. The iron grating was the most necessary feature of all, for I intended that on the other side of it, my relations should range themselves. I mentally ran over the catalog and saw that the whole gang was present, all in their proper places. A sad-eyed row, combined in tristful appeal. We see our error now, they would say. We were always dull dogs, slow to catch, especially in those akin to us. The finer qualities of the soul. We misunderstood you, misappreciated you, and we own up to it. And now, alas, my dear friends, I would strike in here, waving towards an aesthetic hand. One of the emaciated sort that lets the light shine through the fingertips. Alas, you come too late. This conduct is fitting and meritorious on your part, and indeed, I always expected it of you sooner or later. But the die is cast, and you may go home again and bewail at your leisure this too tardy repentance of yours. For me, I am vowed and dedicated, and my relations henceforth are austerity and holy works. Once a month, should you wish it, it shall be your privilege to come and gaze at me through this very solid grating. But, whack. A well-aimed clod of garden soil, whizzing just past my ear, starred on a tree trunk behind, spattering me with dirt. The present came back to me in a flash, and I nimbly took cover behind the trees, realizing that the enemy was up and abroad, with ambuscades, alarms, and thrilling sallies. It was the gardener's boy, I knew well enough, a red proletariat, who hated me just because I was a gentleman. Hastily picking up a nice sticky clod in one hand, with the other I delicately projected my hat beyond the shelter of the tree trunk. I had not fought with anyone all these years for nothing. As I had expected, another clod, of the first class for size and stickiness, took my poor hat full in the center. Then, Ajax-like, shouting terribly, I issued from shelter and discharged my ammunition. Woe then for the gardener's boy, who, unprepared, skipping in premature triumph, took the clod full in his stomach. He, the foolish one, witless on whose side the gods were fighting that day, discharged yet other missiles, wavering and wide off the mark, for his wind had been taken with the first clod, and he shot wildly, as one already desperate and in flight. I got another clod in at short range. We clinched up the brow of the hill and rolled down to the bottom together. When he had shaken himself free and regained his legs, he trotted smartly off in the direction of his mother's cottage. But over his shoulder, he discharged at me both imprecation and deprecation, menace mixed up with an undercurrent of tears. But as for me, I made off smartly for the road, my frame tingling, my head high, with never a backward look at the settlement of suggestive aspect, or my well-planned future, which lay in fragments around it. Life had its jollities. Then, life was action, contest, victory. The present was rosy once more. Surprises lurked on every side, and I was beginning to feel villainously hungry. Just as I gained the road, a cart came rattling by, and I rushed for it, caught the chain that hung below, and swung thrillingly between the dizzy wheels, choked and blinded with delicious-smelling dust, the world slipping by me like a streaky ribbon below, till the driver licked at me with his whip, and I had to descend to earth again. Abandoning the beaten track, I then struck homewards through the fields. Not that the way was very much shorter, but rather because on that route one avoided the bridge and had to splash through the stream and get refreshingly wet. Bridges were made for narrow folk, for people with aims and vocations which compelled abandonment of many of life's highest pleasures. Truly wise men called on each element alike to minister to their joy, and while the touch of sun bathed there, the fragrance of garden soil, the ductile qualities of mud, and the spark-whirling rapture of playing with fire had each their special charm, they did not overlook the bliss of getting their feet wet. As I came forth on the common herald, broke out of the adjoining copse and ran to meet me, the morning rain clouds all blown away from his face. He had made a new squirrel stick, it seemed. Made it all himself, melted the lead and everything. I examined the instrument critically and pronounced it absolutely magnificent. As we passed in at our gate, the girls were distantly visible, gardening with a zeal and cheerful contrast on their heartsick lassitude of the morning. "There's been another letter come today," Harold explained, "and the hamper got joggled about on the journey, and the presents worked down into the straw and all over the place. One of 'em turned up inside the cold duck, and that's why they weren't found at first. And Edward said, 'Thanks awfully.' I did not see Martha again until we were all reassembled at tea time, when she seemed red-eyed and strangely silent, neither scolding nor finding fault with anything. Instead, she was very kind and thoughtful with jams and things, feverishly pressing unwanted delicacies on us, who wanted little pressing enough. Then, suddenly, when I was busiest, she disappeared, and Charlotte whispered me presently that she had heard her go to her room and lock herself in. This struck me as a funny sort of proceeding. Thank you for listening to Sleepy. Good night.